Welcome back to Rewitched, a charmed 1998 rewatch journey. I'm your host, Jess Zankou, and I can't wait to share my thoughts on one of my favorite shows with you. I'll be keeping these recaps spoiler-free and welcome fans, new and old, to join me on my journey here and on social media at Rewitched_pod on Instagram and TikTok. Currently, I'm on season 7. All right, so this week we're talking about season 7, episode 21, Death Becomes Them. So this is part 1 of our season finale. We do get a to be continued at the end of this episode, even though it isn't officially part 1, part 2. In terms of our innocents and villains of the week, so our innocents would be the sisters, primarily Phoebe and Paige, as well as Paige's new charge, Phoebe's friend Tim, and the other previous innocents that they've lost. In terms of our villains of the week, we have Zankou and the alchemist. To get into the sisters' kind of individual storylines going on in the background. So for Phoebe in this episode, we see that there is this boy, Tim, who she goes to school with. They've had a bit of a flirtation. She gets a flat tire. He's fixing it for her and asks her out on a date for the next day, but then is attacked by a demon in the parking garage who seems to ignore Phoebe, go directly for him. Phoebe is wondering if she's cursed throughout this episode, which we later learn was Zankou's goal, and is very guilty about the fact that Tim was killed just because he knew her, because, she does have that worry, and Piper's like, well, maybe he was a demon or a witch, but that Piper was actually Zankou. And she's like, no, I really think this is about me, which she does discover to be true when she goes to the morgue, and seeing the way she reacts to seeing him and the way this is deeply affecting her is very sad, as well as the way she reacts to being haunted and attacked by him later. We also see her guilt about someone like Inspector Rhys Davidson, who, if you guys remember, was one of my faves back in season 3. This kind of bringing back moments where the sisters aren't able to save someone and using it against them, because obviously that's something that's always been difficult for them. I'll come back to Phoebe within the overall storyline, but she is the one we see the most struggle from in this episode with her guilt and her feelings over this. And she doesn't even want to go to work, but then when she is at work, she's become so obsessed with helping everyone she can, answering every letter, answering every email, every phone call, every fax, that she really wants to move on from what happened to her by putting herself into something else and running away from the negative feelings she's experiencing from this loss, which Paige does call her out for later. Though obviously it comes from this place that Phoebe wants to help people, right? That's one of her favorite parts about being a witch and being a columnist, and how that really is a key part of her personality. In terms of Paige, she does have another new charge in this episode. This time it's a whitelighter-to-be named Joanna, who the elders are worried are going to fall off the path. We see that in the first scene where they're together at P3, they're talking a bit about Joanna worrying that she's not having these big things coming for her, and Paige telling her that she does. Joanna's boyfriend, who doesn't want them to be friends, comes up, and Paige gets a really bad vibe from him. She even says to Piper later that she's worried that he'll hurt her. He does show up at P3 and kind of drags her away and is like, I thought I told you not to hang out with her. So obviously this idea that Joanna is being isolated from her friends. She mentions later not really having other friends or people in her life to support her, and how important Paige's friendship has been to her, which is why it's really sad that throughout the episode Paige keeps getting these phone calls and then called away by her sisters. Obviously later, when they have a big fight, Paige goes to her apartment to talk to her, and she brings up the idea that she feels like she's purposeless. What's she gonna do? She's gonna be alone forever if she doesn't stay with Carl, and Paige trying to point out to her that this isn't true. See, she has such a big future ahead of her. She just has to have faith and believe in it. And Paige being really good at guiding and giving advice here. It actually is really sweet to see this friendship between the two of them. But of course, Paige being distracted by other magical things does have to leave. And then we see that Carl is Zankou and does kill her as soon as Paige leaves. And Paige was even like, look, if you need me, like I'm just a call away. And if you get in a really bad situation, just say my name really loudly. And, you know, she's confused by this, but does try it in that moment where Zankou's attacking her. But unfortunately, because he is choking her, she is unable to survive the situation. Paige then shows up later, knocking at the door. The door's open. She's like, I thought I told you to lock it, goes in and believes that Carl is the one who killed her. But then obviously Piper is the one to be like, no, like I think Carl is Zankou. And this was all set up to kind of hurt you, to get you feeling doubt about yourself, to get you feeling guilty the same way with Phoebe. He wants to attack people in our lives to make us vulnerable for some reason. And so that realization, because Paige was the first one to figure out that it was probably Zankou, and then having to have Piper point it out again now that Paige has been affected by a loss. So it is really sad to see that she did lose this charge, who probably now won't get the opportunity to become a whitelighter because of Zankou. But it's also just really sad to know that this is so rooted in real things of women who are in abusive relationships, and their life does end this way. So it is really sad. In terms of Piper in this episode, her little side storyline is basically that her and Leo have been preparing for Chris's first birthday party. They end up, because of all the demonic stuff, having to cancel it. And we see that Piper isn't too torn up about it. She's like, look, like he's won, he's not going to remember. But Leo's the one to be like, but we will. This was supposed to be an important celebration of something for us, that we have this baby, that he is, you know, coming to this new age, and that we're trying to have this normal life. They'd had all these friends invited, and then they do ultimately have to cancel it. Last side storyline I want to talk about before we get into our main storyline is, of course, Daryl and Inspector Sheridan. So we see the continuation of what we've been seeing all season, where Daryl is worried that Sheridan is going to figure things out, that her memory is going to come back. He points this out to Phoebe, who's kind of like, look, I can't worry about that right now. Like, we just have to go see Tim's body. And then, of course, Sheila and him were supposed to have a date, actually, when he was going to the morgue with Phoebe. And she's kind of like, why is this always coming up? Like, why can't you just have someone cover you? He's like, it's something with the sisters. And then we see that Sheridan actually takes that opportunity to call Sheila and tell her that, you know, he might lose his job or get killed because of what he's doing with the sisters, and obviously freaks her out, which then Daryl is really pissed because he shows up and they're both there waiting for him, and he's like, you're way out of line, Inspector. And then she leaves them to talk, and Sheila's like, look, this is their fight, not yours. You can't put yourself and our family at risk. I thought you had stepped away from all of this. And Daryl obviously having that conflict, because earlier in the season he thought the same thing, and now had to come back into realizing that what the sisters do, all that they protect, is worth being a part of in the way that he can. And now having this conflict of like, am I going to lose my family because Sheila is so upset about what could potentially happen? She brings up how she used to worry about criminals getting to him and him getting hurt that way, but now it's so much worse knowing what else is out there, that she'd never tell the sister's secret, but at the same time, she thinks that Daryl does need to take a step back. And we see that he then, when she asks him to ignore Paige's call, he does. And then at the very end of the episode, he decides to take a vacation with his family. And then he has a final conversation with Sheridan at the end of the episode, because she does approach him prior to going to Sheila at the morgue, where she was like, you were here last night. Was it with Phoebe Hollowell? Look, another murder they're involved in. Like, whatever it is they have on you, we have to like come clean and stop them. I can't believe you would protect and defend murderers. Like, this is crazy. You're supposed to be a cop. You're supposed to be a good person. And in the final scene, saying some things that I, again, do want to read from. So first he calls her out for talking to Sheila. He's like, you had no right. She's like, I had every right. We're cops. Crimes are being committed, and that gives me the right. As I said before, you're either with me or against me. And he then tells her that he's taking the vacation time to be with his family. She calls out the timing as suspicious. And then he tells her that she won't be able to take them down. And she's like, is that a threat? He's like, it's a friendly warning. And then he says, what they're doing, what they're all about, it's above reproach. I wouldn't mess with them if I were you. And so calling out what he can't directly say, but the fact that what they're doing is more important than anything that Inspector Sheridan or Daryl will ever do. And you can tell that she's kind of upset in this conversation, even though she plays it off tough until he leaves the room. And I am definitely curious to see what might happen in the finale with Sheridan, now that she very much is on the sisters' trail, set on taking them down. Daryl is stepping away. I'm very, very excited for what might happen there. But to get to our overall storyline with Zankou. So in this episode, Zankou is working with an alchemist in order to use innocence that the sisters have lost in order to affect their emotions so deeply that he'll be able to get to the Book of Shadows. He starts the episode trying to go after it when he's disguised as Piper, but is unable to. That's when he starts using these losses against the sisters, starting of course with Tim, then resurrecting Inspector Reese Davidson, and really blaming Phoebe for his death, being like, look what she did, like all those months before where she could have warned you about what was going to happen, which is the same things he says to Phoebe, because she's like, the angel of death was after you, like there was nothing I could do, which actually we know that was something Prue really struggled with that episode, having to accept that the angel of death would be taking him and she couldn't fight him. But anyway, aside from that, we do then see him being like, yeah, at the end, but all those months before, you could have told me at any point, you could have saved me. My wife, my children, they're growing up without me because of you. It's all your fault that I'm dead. And very much affecting Phoebe in that way. And then we see Paige impacted by the loss of Joanna and the way that the two of them are very close to falling apart in this episode. But Paige being like, you know what? Alchemists work with upper level demons in order to bring back the dead because they can only control them. They need an upper level demon to actually resurrect them. And she realized that it obviously has to be Zankou. There's only one demon who would want to mess with them this way. That's when they're like, okay, so we go for the alchemist to get to Zankou. That's kind of their plan. They have the vanquishing potion for the alchemist. But after all of the attacks, when they're all in the attic together, they do come up with a plan to have Paige try to find Joanna's body in order to track down the alchemist. So she tries to sense her, but because their bond hasn't formed yet, which Leo's kind of like, look, it takes time. That's why you weren't able to sense that she was in danger and save her. So she's unable to sense her, but is able to scry for her. And they see she's at the cemetery and Phoebe's immediate like, that's never good. But they go anyway. And when they're there, they are attacked by all three of the dead people they've already seen in the episode, and then followed up by three more dead people who are innocent Piper's lost. And they start attacking them. They're very much losing the fight. And Piper's kind of like, oh God, like I don't want to do this, but then does start blowing them up. And obviously feels badly about it because she wants to respect them for the loss and the fact that they were innocents in their life and now their bodies are being destroyed, right? It's really sad for her. And you can see like the sisters even coming over to her and they're like, you had no choice, like you had to do it. And you see the alchemist really upset where he's like, oh my God, like he said you would never do that. And Zankou just appears and is like, I lied, and kills the alchemist, which is amazing. We see Zankou throughout this episode really, really playing up his villainy. And we see just how calculated and invested he is in what he's learned about the sisters and how he is able to pick these perfect things, starting with Phoebe, who he thinks would be affected most. And then it's spreading to Paige, that doubt, that worry about the fact of like, am I cursed? Why do people that I connect with always die? I remember not too long ago, earlier in the season, when she was having memories of the losses and one of them was Miles, I was like, why the fuck was this included? But now it's the impact that losses have truly had on her of innocence, and that connects back to this moment with Tim in this episode for me. So now that whole thing in the avatars makes more sense to me. But anyway, these reminders of things that they've done and people they haven't been able to save in the realm of trying to fight evil obviously has a deep impact on them that Zankou wants to play to. We also see that he's very willing to use these other demons. He's talking about the past they had together, working together during the Black Plague and back in the day. And he's like, come on, like I've always kept my promises to you. Very much earning the trust of this alchemist who is like, well, why can't we just bring the bodies back now? Like you're not using them well enough. And Zankou's like, look, I have a very specific plan. You don't defeat the sisters by just doing things kind of willy-nilly. Like we need to stick to what we're doing and make sure that we're really playing with their heads the way that I want to. I don't want to attack them as witches. I want to attack them as women, as a people, and really play with that emotion, which he knows ties them to the book. When they're vulnerable, the book is vulnerable. So that was his plan all along, was to really fuck with them in that way. And he succeeds. He does get the Book of Shadows, because when the sisters return home and Piper's kind of like, I still don't get why he vanquished the alchemist himself, because she's like, why would you do that? He's like, you'll find out soon enough. They arrive home where the Book of Shadows is missing, and they're like, oh God, like what happens now? And we have our very final moment of the episode where he's kind of flipping through the book, laughing, talking about how this is going to be so fun, whatever's coming next. And I agree. I'm very excited to get into the finale to see if this Zankou storyline is going to be wrapped up next episode, how the sisters are going to go about the vanquish, because they even talk about the fact that they can't do it the same way they vanquish the Source, because Zankou knows them too well and will be expecting that. So it is really exciting to see how these storylines are all going to wrap up for the season next week. But yeah, I think that's all I have for this one, and I hope you'll join me back next time.